wanted to make sure that we address an issue that is on the mind of every single Texan that I've listened to, certainly here in North Texas, and that is the dramatic increase in property taxes that we are seeing right now under Greg Abbott's leadership. In the 7 years that he's been governor, property taxes have gone up $20 billion in the state of Texas. That's an increase of 40% over where we were when he first began. I just left a meeting in Fannin County where one resident there told me that she is being priced out of her home right now. She just got her appraisal in. And with that increase in the appraisal, with the increase in the property taxes that she's paying, she wonders whether she's going to be able to stay in her home. Part of the reason we wanted to be here in South Oak Cliff is we're hearing this from residents in this community. Folks who've lived here their entire lives, maybe generations in their family, who are about to get priced out of their homes and priced out of this neighborhood. That's why we're so excited to be joined by one of the neighborhood leaders here, Alondra Lyons, who's going to be joining us shortly. When you add this increase, this inflation in property taxes that we're seeing under Greg Abbott to the other inflation that he's causing, for example, the average ratepayer in the state of Texas is paying $50 more per month in their utility bills than they did a year ago. That's due to Greg Abbott and his mishandling of the electricity grid and the fact that he allowed people to make billions of dollars in profit on charging increases for fuel supply to our generators while making ratepayers across the state of Texas foot the bill. You add to that this stunt that he pulled over the last 2 weeks on the US-Mexico border, which caused a spike in the increase for our cost of groceries, food in our grocery stores. Do not take my word for it. Sid Miller, a statewide elected Republican commissioner of agriculture, said the very same thing on many of your programs and in many of your newspapers. Greg Abbott is causing inflation at the grocery store. And lastly, I just mentioned that I left one of these rural counties north of where we are here today. Greg Abbott also vetoed the Universal Service Fund, which subsidizes rural telephone and internet bills, meaning for our rural neighbors, their costs for internet and phone are going up anywhere between $25 to $100 a month. So whether it's rural internet and phone, whether it's the cost at the grocery store, the increase that we're seeing in utility bills, or the $20 billion increase in property taxes under Greg Abbott, he is the single greatest driver of inflation in the state of Texas, and it's causing real pain to our fellow Texans right now. Here are a few ideas that I have after listening to my fellow Texans for how we're going to get a handle on this and bring property tax relief to our fellow Texans. Number one, we do not have enough housing in this state. We're one of the fastest growing states in the union, and capacity is not keeping up with demand. In fact, the price of housing has increased 3 times since Greg Abbott has, 3 times the increase in income or salaries since Greg Abbott has taken office. So homes are getting a lot more expensive, and we're not getting paid enough to be able to afford them or even to stay in them. One of the reasons I'm so glad that the council member is here is that as governor, I'm going to work with local city councils, local commissioners' courts, local leadership to make sure that we address this desperate shortage in housing across the state of Texas. Number two, while property owners and primarily homeowners and renters are paying the lion's share of the burden at a local level to fund our government, far too often corporations and the very wealthiest are getting out of their fair share. And that's because the law under Greg Abbott allows them to do that. We need fairness in appraisals, and we need fairness in what people are paying in their property taxes. Most homeowners cannot afford the lobbyists or the attorneys that can contest corporate valuations. And so corporate property owners are able to bring down their bills by billions of dollars every single year. As governor, I'm going to work with the legislature to ensure that we have full sales price disclosure in the state of Texas so that everyone is paying their fair share, which means that homeowners and renters will pay less going forward. Third, I'm going to work with the legislature to make sure that the state of Texas is funding its fair share of public education. It used to be historically that the state would pay 50%, the local property taxpayer would pay 50%. Under Greg Abbott, it is 60% to the local property taxpayer and only 40% at the state of Texas. State Senator Nathan Johnson, who's just joined us, and Republican State Representative Guerin have both introduced legislation that would require the state to meet that 50% threshold. As governor, I will sign that legislation into law. That is further reduction in the property tax burden for the local homeowner here in South Oak Cliff or any neighborhood across the state of Texas. And lastly, before I turn it over to the state senator, we have to ensure that we look at new sources of income. And here are two that I want to share with you, which both address a public policy problem that we have and also ensure that we have more state revenue to lower property taxes at the local level. One is Medicaid expansion, and we so happen to have the author in the state Senate of the Medicaid expansion bill written on Texas terms by listening to Republicans and Democrats, small business owners, homeowners, Texans from all walks of life, to make sure that more people are connected to care, that we attract more physicians, and that we draw down $10 billion in our own money that we pay to the federal government in income taxes so that it can come back to this state. It produces extraordinary local returns in our economy, and by the way, it reduces the property tax burden because we no longer have to foot the bill for indigent health care at our public hospitals through our property tax bill. So that's one way of getting new revenue into the state. The second is legalizing marijuana. Right now, we spend $500 million a year locking people up for a substance that is legal in most of the rest of the country, most of the rest of the developed world. We also lose out on, conservatively speaking, $500 million in tax revenue if we were to tax the regulated and controlled sale of marijuana, as many other U.S. states do. Those are four ways that we can reduce the property tax burden on our fellow Texans and do something to change this inflation that we're seeing in Texas, thanks to Greg Abbott. Having said that, I now want to introduce our state senator, then I'll introduce the council member. This is State Senator Nathan Johnson, who, as I just mentioned, has authored the bill that would allow us to expand Medicaid, to bring this revenue into our communities, and to reduce our property tax burden. He is someone I am looking forward to working with in state government so that we can fix this. Nathan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Beto. I do want to thank Beto O'Rourke for the seriousness with which he's taking these issues, the depth that he's addressing them here in the public eye, and for allowing me to join him here and speak to you all about them. There's several issues related to property tax that we all have to have in mind in the legislature all the time. Lead off with the big one that you just heard Beto O'Rourke talking about, which is Medicaid expansion. We think about that in terms of healthcare, but healthcare relates to property taxes because it costs us here in Dallas County 6 times as much to take care of somebody who doesn't have health insurance as it does to take care of somebody who does have health insurance. 6 times as much. That comes from your property taxes. If we were to expand Medicaid, the pressure on our hospital districts and the taxes they would have to levy upon their citizens would go down. Other things that we can talk about is the disproportionate burden that goes to residential homeowners. Equal and uniform, good concept, everybody gets taxed at an equal rate. Uniform discounts relative to market value, but we have a problem with our property tax system, as introduced in 1997. On the equal and uniform concept, essentially, we had a provision added to the tax code that unmoors our property tax appraisal system from actual market value. And the legislation that I introduced in my first session simply would reattach the appraisal process to market value, because if we don't do that, it's subject to manipulation. This isn't my idea. This came from the State Legislative Budget Board in 2015. It continues to be a recommendation from a lot of people in the area, to the extent that there is some concern that maybe we don't have a disproportionate burden shifting from large commercial property owners to residential property owners, then there's no problem we're going to have when we attach it to market value, because it's already just fine. If it's not just fine, we can make it there, and there could be $2 to $5 million there. Let's find out. Secondly, with regard to equal and uniform, we allow comparables to go outside of the district. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We have a separate process to accommodate one-of-a-kind properties, but as long as we're going out of the district, again, the system is too subject to manipulation. The appraisal districts do not have the resources to accommodate this. One other issue we can talk about is affordability of homes. The state has not really done anything to ensure the adequate supply of affordability of homes. We criticize California all the time for their high real estate prices, and for sure, Californians are leaving, New Yorkers are leaving because they can't afford to live there, and they're coming here where we have lower property values. But if we do not address the lack of affordable housing in this state, we will continue to see the prices of our real estate rise as they are right now. Local governments are doing as much as they can to keep the property taxes and real property values, but it's definitely something that we need to address. So there are ways that we can look at these things. Lastly, let's talk about the property tax burden on people in their homes. There are a lot of people in a higher income bracket that aren't going to be taxed out of their homes. Their property taxes are going up. That's a really serious concern. But we also have concerns about how we fund our state. If someone is truly suffering the burden of higher property taxes, they're probably suffering the burden of lack of health care and other things. What can we do for them in the property tax realm? We have tax deferrals for people 65 and over. We have tax deferrals for veterans and other categories of people. Could we not also have a tax deferral system for people who are struggling financially? I think we could probably do it. So what we need are people in the legislature and people in leadership who are willing to think up new solutions to real problems, not just come in here with buckets of cash every couple of years, buy property taxes down, and hope we can do it again next time. Because I don't think anybody, neither businesses nor individuals, can afford the uncertainty associated with that. We need a much more well thought out system. So I again, Beto, thank you for allowing me to be here to speak with you, and for the seriousness with which you're taking these issues.
Gracias. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Grateful to Senator Johnson for joining us. We're now going to hear from Councilmember Bazaldua, and in addition to holding this important position of public trust, he's one of the youngest elected officials anywhere in the state of Texas right now. So I know he's particularly sensitive to young families who are confronting this crisis in affordability, in housing availability, and the sharp increase in property taxes under Greg Abbott. And he's the kind of partner that I'm looking forward to working with at the local level. As we know, in the Abbott administration, he's really made a war on local communities and on local control. I want to be a partner at the local level, and it does not matter to me whether that partnership is formed with Republicans or Democrats or independents, and most of these positions on the city council are nonpartisan anyhow. It's just about what makes things better for the people of Texas, and in this case, that is reducing property taxes and reducing inflation. Councilmember, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I do want to thank Beto for the opportunity to be a part of today and to speak on such important issues, and also thank you to our state senator for your words and your commitment as well. The issue absolutely is nonpartisan. The issue that we have right now is a working class crisis. Working class crisis that is centered around a lack of housing stock, that's centered around a lack of access to affordable health care, that has, when I was a teacher, students of mine in the community that I now serve on council who got their breakfast at the truck stop because of the food insecurity issues that exist within our communities. And just as mentioned, we approach legislative sessions at the local level with somewhat of a concern with what control is looking to be hindered, instead of having leaders down in Austin that are working with local leaders that are here on the front lines of these issues to help prevent this displacement that we see, to help provide better job opportunities for our working class communities, to help provide more tools that are only so available at a local level to prevent the property tax, the valuations from displacing seniors on fixed incomes. These are all issues that touch no matter what party you vote on. These are the working class communities that keep our economy going on a day-to-day basis. Working class communities like the industry that I came from before teaching, in the hospitality industry and the restaurant industry. And I'm just thankful to see that we have leaders at the state level who want to extend concern and lend an ear and bring to the table local leaders on how we can work together collaboratively to be best and most effective for those most vulnerable residents. So again, I just want to thank the opportunity to be a part of the conversation and thank the commitment of Beto O'Rourke for when he gets into office, that we won't have a legislative body down in Austin that we kind of are apprehensive about looking forward to sessions coming up, but instead looking at how we can further collaborate with those leaders and how we can bring more resources and more solution to the issues that plague all Texans across the state. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, appreciate it. We were hoping to be joined by Alendra Lyons, but it looks like she is not here yet. We wanted to make sure that we brought every level of leadership to this press conference, from the state senate to the city council to the neighborhood, and certainly what we want to do as governor of the state of Texas. So with that, we're very happy, all three of us, to answer any question that you might have on this issue. And Chris is...
Yeah, we're going to start with the morning news and then Star Telegram.
Okay.
So, Wilmer and then Jess.
Great.
In developing your proposal, did you consider an expansion of gambling to pump in revenue to offset, property tax reduction?
Yes. So I talked about a few of the ways that we bring in new revenue. You know, if corporations have to essentially follow the same practices that we as homeowners have to follow. In other words, we're going to make sure that we pay on the full real valuation of our property. That's anywhere from $2 to $5 billion a year. I mentioned the $1 billion net positive from marijuana legalization. And then we talked about what Medicaid expansion would do for our communities. If we were to make legal casino gambling and sports betting in the state of Texas, which, as you all know, many Texans engage in now, it's only that those revenues go to other states and to other state governments, we would be able to bring in billions of dollars more. And from listening to Texans across the state, one, it's a very popular proposal, and two, I think it would also help us to address some of the challenges that we have in reducing inflation and property taxes in the state of Texas. So I think that warrants a very close look, and it's something that I'm inclined to support.
Appraisal caps, what are your thoughts on caps on local government? Don't like that particularly. What do you think?
You know, if the state's going to be a good partner to local governments, then we have to be able to trust local governments to make the best decisions for their constituents. Whether that's the school board, whether that's the city council, whether that's the county commissioner's court. Our best ability to help local leaders to do that is by making sure that the state of Texas does its part through the state government. I talked about the 50-50 share of education spending. I'm also making sure that we pick up the tab for things that are truly state responsibilities going forward. That reduces pressure on these local leaders, and it reduces pressure on the local property taxpayer. It looks like we have Alendra Lyons now, who's so kind to have come to join us. Alendra, we just talked about the pressure that homeowners are under right now as appraisals continue to increase, as we don't create enough housing, and as property taxes go through the roof, literally $20 billion increase since Greg Abbott has taken office. We're really interested in understanding what that has meant to the homeowners in this neighborhood that you're part of the leadership for. So if you join us at the microphones, we'd love to hear your comments. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you for inviting me in. This is a topic that I'm really sensitive about.
If you could step up just a little bit, they're saying they can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. This is a topic that I'm really sensitive about, the property tax. I moved back to the community that I grew up in 10 years ago, and upon the return, I knew that things were going to change, and so the past 6 years I've been working to be proactive. What do we do when the property tax started to rise up, and investigating different ideas, community land trust, freeze tax, because the seniors, they can't go out and get jobs to supplement to pay the property tax. I have an aunt that is 87. Her property tax, her house is appraised now at, I think, $483,000. So at 87, she's not going to be able to go out, and do anything to take care of taxes, but they're being taken care of. But many people, they won't be able to do that. The seniors are, if you have newcomers which have come to my neighborhood and they have purchased homes in the past 10 years, and now the property tax is going up, but their paycheck is not going up. So that's a mismatch, and their mortgage is rising because of the property tax. So it's something that has to be done that we can help, everybody to be able to benefit. But right now it's not on even planes, because my house that I'm in, it went from 49 in the past 10 years, now it's up to 98,000. So that's not good when you tax real slow, gradually, and then all of a sudden, you get a big increase. So that's not good at all. So we have to think of ways that we can really help out to make it easy on people. Not that we have to tell people we have to pay tax, but they're just not doing it on the even plane. It's just making it hard for people who make low income to be able to afford a home, if you want to stay in the community, not be pushed out.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate that. All four of us would be very happy to answer any questions. Are we going to?
Go to Jess at the Star Telegram.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions today. Outside of promoting sales transparency on a state level, which I think many Texans are obviously attached to, how would you combat the undervaluation of commercial properties that's leading to residential homeowners having to provide more and more high for
That's the equal and uniform concept that we were talking about earlier.
I'm
sorry, thank you. What you're asking about is disproportionate burden that we see, essentially a shifting of the tax burden from large commercial property owners to residential property owners. First of all, we're not faulting anybody who owns commercial property. We're not saying there's a plan to shift the property tax burden, but in fact what you've got is a broken statute that incentivizes shareholders' demand that you minimize your taxes. And we have a system that allows us to appraise commercial property values, very valuable properties, separate from the market value of those properties. It's subject to manipulation. It's leading to property valuations that are vastly below the actual value of the properties. And every dollar that you don't collect on taxation of those has to be picked up somewhere. The city's got a budget, the county's got a budget, the hospital district's got a budget, the school's got a budget. It's got to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is residential property owners. It's affixed to that statute. There's a third paragraph that we need to cross out or fix. It's in the bill. I know that Beto O'Rourke understands this. I think our others here understand this. I think a lot of people in the legislature understand this, but it's not particularly popular right now. It needs to be, because property taxes are going up, and residential homeowners are the ones who are really feeling it.
One example that I think even furthers the senator's point. I was recently in Port Arthur, Jefferson County in Southeast Texas, listening to the school board president, who's doing some phenomenal things, by the way, on career education there at Memorial High School. Just really amazing. But he told me that he just cut a check, $30 million, to Motiva, which is the largest refinery in North America, which happens to be in Jefferson County. Motiva could hire the attorneys, the lobbyists, all the folks that they need to lower their valuation and require that school district to write them a $30 million check. And to the senator's point, I don't know that I fault Motiva for doing that. They're trying to maximize return for their shareholders. That's what they're in business to do. But we really need a fair playing field, because none of us homeowners can hire the attorneys or the lobbyists to do that right now. We've got to make sure that it is a fair system, and today it is not.
We're going to go to Jack Fink.
Hi, Congressman. I wanted to ask you. So obviously the problem is very easy to describe. Everybody gets it when they see their property appraisals, their property tax bill. The solutions, on the other hand, not so easy. And so I'm wondering, first you said the governor has been responsible, basically overseeing $20 billion in property tax increases over 7 years. Where did you get that figure so that we can see it for ourselves? And then the other issue is with regards to two of your ideas, 50% of state funding guaranteed, and then when you combine that with Medicaid expansion, even though most money does come from the federal government, the state still has to pay extra for that. Bottom line, does the state have that money to pay for it so that you can take that burden off the local property tax?
On your first question, we are comparing what people were paying in property taxes prior to Greg Abbott becoming governor and what they're paying now. We're happy to send you the sources just to make sure that you can check our work on that. To your question about whether we can afford to bring down the property tax burden for homeowners and renters, the answer is yes. In the 9th largest economy on the planet, in the wealthiest country in the world, it is not for lack of resources, it is for lack of political will and leadership right now. When current leadership is more invested in stunts, like shutting down commercial trade at the border, like spending $5 billion on political theater where our state meets Mexico and the rest of the world, those are resources that could have been invested in public education, for example, to meet that 50% goal that is totally attainable, but right now is lacking the will of the governor to do that. So in addition to current choices that we're making, these new revenue streams that I talked about, not the least of which making sure that commercial property taxpayers follow the same rules that we follow as residential homeowners and property taxpayers, we have the revenue, we have the billions of dollars necessary to bring down local property taxes.
And I know in 2019 this came up. I think there was a bill, you mentioned Charlie Garen's, but it didn't go anywhere. So how do you convince the legislature this time around this is something they just have to do? And as you said, the money is there, but they just have to do it.
I think the fact that you have both Charlie Garen, a Republican, and Nathan Johnson, a Democrat, supporting the same idea shows that there's true bipartisan appeal. We can get this done if we have leadership at the top that is seeking out the common ground. And that's what I'm going to do as governor. I am looking forward to working with Republicans and Democrats alike. When the senator introduced a Medicaid expansion bill, I mentioned earlier, he did it on Texas terms. He didn't copy any other state. He didn't take any dictate from the federal government. He listened to business owners, to property owners, to Republicans and Democrats alike. And that's why that bill enjoys support, not just from Democrats, but Republicans as well. Right now, we are a deeply divided, highly fractured state. We do not have to be that way going forward. These are some of the common ground, common sense issues that will allow us to move forward as a state and reduce inflation and property tax burden on homeowners in Texas.
We've got Joshua at the Texas Tribune. So I wonder what role you think the state should play in sort of stimulating affordable housing. Like, what does that look like? Does that mean putting incentives into market rate housing, affordable housing? Do you create rent control laws? Like, how do you sort of create that affordable housing stance?
There are certainly financing vehicles that it's all a matter of choices and priorities in our budget that we could invest in. And not only does that help the most vulnerable among us, it helps everyone else. The case that I'm trying to make today in part is that you have skyrocketing valuations in part because you have scarcity of supply and really high demand right now. We can continue to stick our heads in the sand and hope that that's going to go away, but it won't, or we can take some leadership. In addition to what the state can do from the Capitol, we can work with local communities who, as you probably know right now, are literally prohibited from innovating or coming up with their own ideas to meet the demand that they see. For example, I believe inclusionary zoning is prohibited by state law right now. If a local community, through their elected representatives, no matter how rural or urban, no matter how conservative or progressive, if that is what they choose to do to make sure that they address this issue and reduce inflation and property taxes, I want to make sure that they have a partner in the state capitol to be able to do that. So local control, that's a real Texas value that belongs to neither party, and it's something that I really believe in. And that's why we have local leadership here today to make sure that you hear my commitment to work with these local partners to get the job done.
Would you seek a bill to allow inclusionary zoning, or would you look for some kind of zoning reform overhaul?
Having been to each one of these 254 counties, each community is unique and different, has their own demands and sees their own opportunities. You really got to do the work, as I've done as a candidate, to show up to all these counties as governor, to listen to these local leaders. They are going to tell us what the solutions are to the problems they face. They know far better than anyone in Austin about how to address these challenges. So that really is job number one, but that is something, it's an example of something that I've heard from local leaders in different communities. They have solutions ready to go on the table, but they're literally prohibited by mandates from the governor right now from being able to do that. Not unlike what you saw during the pandemic when the governor prohibited business owners, prohibited local governments from making their own decisions for the benefit of those that they were either elected or in charge of serving and taking care of. As governor, I want to make sure that we respect local leadership.
We've got ABC right down the middle there.
I want to ask a bit of a personal question. Personally, have felt an increase in appraisals and property taxes. And then the other question I have, how will you convince people to utilize your
It's interesting. I mentioned that we were in Bonham and Fannin County a little bit earlier, and we hold all of our meetings as town halls. Anyone can ask any question, make any point. And a gentleman stood up and took the microphone and he said, I just opened my appraisal notice, and if you all haven't done it, I encourage you to do it. And someone else piped up and they said, but when you open it, make sure you're sitting down. That's what we feel in El Paso. That's what Amy and I felt when we opened up our appraisal notice, which is on our kitchen counter right now. We have far more demand than we have capacity in the state of Texas. And as the state senator just said, we're not doing anything right now to address affordability or supply. That means listening to and working with the home builders, with the multifamily developers, with local governments who know where the need is and want to make sure that they satisfy that for the well-being of their community. On marijuana, I don't know that there's an issue that more people in Texas agree on than that one. As you know, almost every state in the union has addressed this issue except for the state of Texas. And in a country that incarcerates more people than any country on the planet, we are the state that incarcerates more of our own than any other state. And disproportionately, those are black and brown Texans who are arrested for nonviolent offenses, including possession of marijuana, which is legal in most of the rest of the country. I know that our fellow Texans understand this. And the last point I want to make that I think makes the case, we were in Fort Worth at the beginning of this campaign. And after I addressed everyone who'd come out, a veteran who served our country in Vietnam came up to me and he said, Beto, I can go to the VA in Dallas and they will prescribe me an opioid, no questions asked, to which I may become addicted and from which I may die. But if I want to use marijuana, which is the one way I'm able to deal with my post-traumatic stress disorder from my service to our country in Vietnam, I'm somehow a criminal in the eyes of the law. I want to make sure every veteran who has served this country, that is the way in which they're going to be able to deal with their symptoms from service, that they are able to do that. They're able to do that freely and without risk of being incarcerated in this state. This is something most Texans understand and will get behind.
Did anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, you want to add anything, Senator?
Just one observation. Nothing moves the legislature like a few electoral losses. In 2018, there was a pretty big changeover, and it was one of the most productive sessions in the history of the state. If there's an electoral message sent in November, I think you may see a lot of these things that seem insurmountable today quite manageable next session.
In other words, if Democrats beat Republicans.
It's one way of looking at it, yes.
Congressman, I have
Sorry,
another
Jack,
question.
we're just going to go to the Dallas
I'm sorry,
Examiner
I
real quick. We got
apologize.
Diane
Yep.
here, and then we can come back.
No problem.
I understand that the state of Texas has one of the highest property rates in the country. Why is it going out of control? Where people can't even, they can be forced out of their homes that they paid their entire life to pay off.
Well, we see that happening literally in the neighborhood that we're in right now. And you just gave us a very graphic example of that, of what somebody in their 80s is having to deal with. Someone who cannot produce a second income, cannot work another job. There are so many in our communities, including retired teachers, who have not seen a cost of living adjustment since the year 2004, who are struggling to make ends meet to begin with. And then, as you just pointed out, as appraisals go up, so do property taxes, and many are forced to leave their homes. The problems are lack of supply. We haven't addressed housing in the state of Texas. The problem is that we haven't had a governor who's focused on solutions to real problems as much as he is on political stunts that score points against, President Biden or anyone else he's up against, or that get him a spot on Fox News. We haven't been willing to look at new sources of revenue, and I've outlined some of those here today. And we haven't been willing to cross the very wealthiest in this state. Those corporations who, again, we do not begrudge their success. We're grateful for those that they employ, for the success that they bring to our communities. But when they're able to get out of paying the burden that I and you pay as homeowners or renters, then the burden ends up falling even heavier on us. So these are some solutions that make up for the failure in leadership that we've seen so far that has produced this in the first place. Thank you.
We're going to take one question from Telemundo, and then we'll come back to you, Jack.
Estamos hablando sobre la inflación de Greg Abbott y también que estamos viendo los impuestos de nuestras propiedades subiendo cada año desde los 7 años que está gobernador del estado de Texas. Necesitamos hacer algo para bajar los impuestos, los costos, los precios para la gente que vive aquí en el estado de Texas. Podemos hacerlo y podemos hacerlo para tener nuevas áreas de ingresos para el estado de Texas. Podemos hacerlo con la construcción de nuevas casas y apartamentos en nuestras comunidades. Y podemos hacerlo como ser socio a las representantes y senadores, a los miembros del cabildo y el liderazgo que tenemos aquí en nuestros barrios en cada condado del estado de Texas. No más faltamos el liderazgo que merecemos aquí. Con eso podemos bajar el costo de vivir aquí en Texas. Como gobernador va a ser la prioridad de mi administración. Thank you.
And Jack, you had one more.
Yeah, I have a short turnaround, so I just want to be clear as far as funding is concerned. You said before about the choices, and you mentioned, what was it, $5 billion that the state is spending at the border.
That's right.
So to be clear, are you saying all that $5 billion should, instead of going extra to the border, should go to help pay for property tax relief? And as far as your other plan about legalizing marijuana, are you saying that your plan would take all of that money, a portion of that money? Is there any estimate on how much money that would raise to help provide that property tax relief for local property taxpayers?
When it comes to the border, unlike this current governor, I'm going to work with the legislature. I'm going to work with the senator, but I'm also going to work with his colleagues on the other side of the aisle and make sure that we address our needs on the border in a deliberative way that actually produces results and not stunts. I don't know what the price tag is going to be on that. It is certainly not $5 billion a year, which is what we are currently spending. The activation of 10,000 Guard members, for example, I bring every single one of those Guard members home today. If I were the governor of the state of Texas, there's absolutely no need for them to be there. That would save us billions of dollars over the coming years, as an example. On marijuana, the $1 billion is derived from $500 million in savings and $500 million in taxation once we regulate and control the sale of marijuana in Texas, as so many other states have done. That $1 billion, again, this is one of the things that the senator has reminded me of is that the governor is not a king. The governor is but one branch of state government and needs to work with the state legislature to decide how we spend the people's money, the revenues of the people of the state of Texas. What makes a lot of sense to me, and listening to the senator and his colleagues, is a focus on public education, which is a priority in its own right, worthy of our attention, but also has the added benefit of reducing local property tax burden to our school districts. So that seems to make a lot of sense to me, Jack, as a priority for where that $1 billion would go.
And we've got to wrap it there.
Okay. Thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Gracias. Good work. No, okay. You were gracious for coming out. I saw the video. You're nicer than the stocks. I love what you said at the end. See change. Raising the legs to compromise consensus. And you know that you caught their attention. Wait, hold on. What did you just say? Yeah. You're not going to reject that interview.
Yeah, the hard part is finding all this stuff. The hard part is just finding everything.
Well, yes, yes, and this,
The only